Hello, everyone. This is Will again, doing another special episode where I get to exercise my First Amendment rights to free speech. And just like last time, everything I say here is my personal opinion as a private citizen and does not represent in any way any of the policies of any organization I may be associated with. Okay. Last time I expressed concern with what's going on in the country and erosion of separation of powers between the co-equal branches of the government, undermining of the judiciary, all those sorts of things. If you've been paying even a little bit of attention, you'll know that the FBI arrested a Wisconsin judge that under circumstances that are, a little murky, but the legal community said that this was highly irregular and the way it was done was highly irregular. And, I think most observers saw that this was a way to send a message to the judiciary from the executive branch, especially since you had the head of the FBI sending a tweet, which he then deleted. The Pam Bondi sending a message. Those are also very unusual. So anyway, so that has happened. That what I was talking about, actually going after judges more directly. Here's another Trump headline. New York Times headline from a couple days ago. Judges worry Trump could tell U.S. Marshals to stop protecting them. More recently, basically yesterday, Trump says he could free Albrego Garcia from El Salvador, but won't. Okay. Supreme Court said in a 9-0 decision that he should. One thing that's interesting is that the opinion of voters and polls clearly show that voters are becoming very concerned about this. Starting to see that in a lot of polls now that President Trump's been in office 100 days. New Justice Department policy. There's Attorney General Pam Bondi. Now allows pursuit of reporters' records and leak inquiries. So an attack on the press. U.S. restores legal status for many international students, but warns of removals to come. Okay, so the executive branch has lost a lot of lawsuits, and has rolled back some things, but keeps going. Our economy is under tremendous pressure because of tariffs. More press things, so 60 Minutes and CBS News, which is owned by Paramount, the owner of Paramount, more billionaires, wants to sell Paramount and needs basically approval from the Trump administration to do everything. 60 Minutes, which is, investigative show, has been around since I've been around. The top producer, quit this past week, saying that he can no longer exercise independent control in terms of the news, because Trump administration is going to have basically veto power over any sort of deal. So more media attacks. 3 U.S. citizen children moved to Honduras. Trump signs 3 executive orders addressing immigration and policing, including, including having federal officers, help with local policing. And this has also been seen as a possible way to, sort of get into the Insurrection Act or martial law or whatever, by some observers. Another New York Times article on the all the stuff going on with crypto. There's a lot going on there with crypto stuff, which is worth watching. Here's Maria Ressa for Democracy Now! I'm talking Democracy Now! So she's a Nobel laureate and journalist, and she covered what was going on in the Philippines, and ended up being imprisoned and being threatened and all these things. So she has been talking with the head of VDEM that tracks the state of democracy in countries around the world. She's saying that today, something like 72% of all countries are under some sort of autocracy. And then the head of VDEM says at the current rate, the United States will no longer be a democracy by the summer. There was a very interesting talk in New Hampshire by the governor of Illinois, who everyone thinks wants to run for president as a Democrat, which he may. So he gave a very fiery speech. Now, here we got more billionaire, right? But I thought there were interesting aspects of his talk, and he called at the end for, mass civil, nonviolent uprising, people in the streets and that kind of thing. So you're at least I'm hearing this more and more. People in New York Times calling for massive civil disobedience or protests or whatever it is. We see things like 50-51 and all of the protests happening in every city of any size. May 1st, May Day, is going to be the next big set of protests. Anyway, so those are just a few things going on. One of my friends asked me after my last video about possible ways to get information or news. What am I looking at? And so I thought I'd just share a few things that I'm looking at in terms of news sources, a few books that I'm reading, maybe a couple YouTube channels or whatever I'll mention. So as far as daily news, I subscribe to New York Times. So there are ways to get the news sources for free, or usually you can read at least some of the articles for free, or they're like gift articles you can find and various things. For the news sources that are actually doing good investigative journalism, I actually, if I can afford it, try to support them, or at least some of them, because I think it's important. So I do subscribe to New York Times. They've been doing a lot of high quality reporting. Whenever you're looking at a newspaper like this, you have to keep in mind there's a separation between the newsroom and the editorials. So the newsrooms, even if the editorial sections or the opinion sections are maybe more left of center or right of center for different newspapers, in theory, the newsroom should be, less biased, let's say. Okay, so New York Times has a reputation for their opinion pieces and editorials to be more left. But the newsroom is not supposed to be as much. Now, there's a long history. Like if you read The Power Broker by Robert Caro, you'll see that one of the things Robert Moses did was become very friendly with the family that owned the New York Times, and they would give him lots of good press. So, these things are not perfect, and New York Times apparently works quite differently than, say, the LA Times in terms of even the newsroom. However, just keep in mind that the opinion or editorial sections might have more of a slant than sort of the news part. Okay, so then there's the Washington Post. Traditionally, this also had more left of center in terms of opinion pieces and editorials. Famously, Jeff Bezos recently told the people working at the Washington Post that the editorials or whatever are supposed to have they're supposed to talk about the benefits of capitalism and all these sorts of things. So everyone saw this as, during Trump's first term, the Washington Post really hounded Trump in a lot of ways. So Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos now. And there was like a fact checker that apparently said that Trump had lied 30,000 plus times during first term. They don't do that anymore. They don't have that tracker anymore. So I don't know if there are any changes to the newsroom and news reporting. They seem like they're still going after the administration for anything that they think is wrong. But in terms of like an editorial policy, it does seem that the Washington Post and certainly like the LA Times have been reined in. LA Times also owned by a billionaire. Both the LA Times and the Washington Post, the owners, both billionaires, apparently told the staff to not do an endorsement because they were going to both endorse Kamala Harris, I believe. And they were told not to do that the newspaper wasn't going to have an official endorsement. So anyway, just to keep in mind, it does actually matter at some level, who owns these newspapers and what their relationship is with the administration and what their editorial policy is and all that. From the newsroom standpoint and investigative reporting, Washington Post, I think, is still doing a good job. Wall Street Journal, that's another one. So Wall Street Journal, much more focus on business, has a reputation of being much more conservative and right-wing, especially in like the opinions and editorials. The newsroom, once again, does some good investigative reporting. This is a newspaper owned by the Murdoch family, Rupert Murdoch and all that. And so the same people who own Fox News, right? Fox News, fair and balanced, supposedly. I don't think so. Fox News, I don't even look at that. But in the Wall Street Journal, if you're going to look at the Wall Street Journal, and you could argue this is for all these newspapers, pay attention to the news and the news reporting, the editorials and the opinions. Anything you see there, take with a grain of salt. I would say that sort of blanket statement for all these news sources. But the Wall Street Journal, you're going to tend to see something much more supportive of conservative or maybe even MAGA values. Now, one reason I try to read a variety of papers in sources is that I want to see what people are saying. I want to see what the opinion pieces are that are more conservative and more liberal and maybe more in the middle. I think that's useful. I don't always and only want to read things that maybe I would agree with or that have one point of view. Now, I don't particularly mind paying for the New York Times. I am paying for the Washington Post. I just recently renewed my subscription, and the New York Times. I'm sorry, Wall Street Journal. I'm a little iffy about doing it for the Washington Post, given their editorial change. I'm very iffy with the Wall Street Journal. However, my view right this second is I do want to support investigative journalism, but there's another perspective of, you don't have to pay to get access to the news a lot of the time. So leave that to you. Here's The Guardian, which I'm not, maybe I'm paying like $5 a month or something now, but I signed up for an account recently for them. I think you can basically get everything free if you sign up, and you can see a lot of articles without signing up. So this is in the UK, and this is very, very much a progressive newspaper. So once again, if you look at opinions, just be aware that for this newspaper in particular, it is designed to, defend progressive values. So independent journalism, sure, I'll say it's independent in some sense, although I think it's, but it definitely has a perspective, right? They're probably not going to write a lot of opinion pieces that are supportive of the Trump administration. So just be aware of that. And then there's The Hill, which has news from Capitol Hill. So that could be interesting. Now, I don't read all of these things every day, okay, but I do sort of cycle through them. The Punch Bowl news, this is something I hadn't even heard of until they were on the news everywhere today, because they had this story about Amazon to display tariff costs for consumers. And then when the White House was asked about that today in a press conference, apparently after this story came out, President Trump called Jeff Bezos personally, and now it's not going to happen. Supposedly it was an administrative error or something. So, Anyway, so this is a newspaper that reports on what's going on in Congress and politics. Harvard Crimson. Harvard is very much in the news, talking about protecting and supporting institutions. Harvard was really one of the first institutions to stand up, and the biggest institution to stand up. And I think that gave a lot of other institutions some backbone. And you could see this in terms of other universities, and I think it even helped outside of the universities. I was like, okay, Harvard can stand up. So anyway, if you want to know what's going on with Harvard, actually the Harvard Crimson, which is run by students, does some pretty good investigative reporting. So that's worth watching if you're following the Harvard case, which I think is important, especially if you're interested in academia. Okay, so Atlantic, which is not really a daily magazine, but they seem, at least on the online version, often have updated articles. So I guess the line is blurring between getting a magazine once a month or once a week or every 2 weeks or whatever, and having things updated all the time. So the Atlantic I subscribe to, and that's had some really good coverage of things going on. So that one I can recommend for sure. Harper's, I've liked Harper's for a long time, on and off. They've had different editors. Yeah, we'll see. I'm not sure. So far, I'm not sure if, I don't know. Harper's is not really investigative journalism. It's more like general writing and stories and essays and things like that. So, culturally, I think it's an interesting magazine. I don't think it's essential in the same way as like New York Times or The Atlantic. The Economist, okay, is The Economist. That's also from the UK. This tends to be a little right of center in some issues at least, but I think it's less biased in terms of opinions than say the Wall Street Journal, and certainly less than Fox in terms of being to the right. So anyway, they do good investigative reporting. So it's also it's always interesting to see what they're saying. And this is like The Guardian, a perspective from the UK. The New Republic, so this is left-leaning, maybe progressive-leaning, and has lots of interesting writing. Vanity Fair actually has a fair amount of reporting. So, got Vanity Fair too. There's Raw Story, which I guess is supposed to be like the left-leaning version of something like the Drudge Report to the right. They have some interesting things, and I think they do try to track down some stories. This one it's like very, how do I say it? Everything is kind of over the top, right? It's all, it's not restrained. It's kind of in your face. So might be some interesting things. This was one I was kind of on the fence, but there were a couple stories that I was interested in. It's like, maybe I'll try. I don't know if I'll keep this one. Foreign Affairs. So obviously this is focusing more on the foreign things, but this is known for high quality, essays by people thinking deeply about the affairs between different countries. And of course, our foreign affairs are changing. Our foreign policy is basically reversing in a lot of ways. New Yorker, another classic magazine, and a mixture of literary and ideas and culture and book reviews and things like that, but also obviously lots of things about Trump and whatever's going on. I would say that this is more left-leaning. Paris Review. I finally subscribed to the Paris Review, not because I necessarily thought that it'd have a tremendous amount of reporting, but just more like supporting a cultural institution, supporting literature and ideas and the arts. Same thing for New York Review of Books. Now, I think this will have some relevant books, that sort of thing. But once again, I just want to support some institutions, and I might not have. I certainly knew about the Paris Review, and I knew about the New York Review of Books, but I've never subscribed to either one, or even had an account for either one. But yeah, so here we have an essay by Noah Feldman, The Last Bulwark. The fate of our democracy today depends on the judiciary's commitment to liberty, constitutionalism, and legality. Yeah. So, looks good. Wired, it's another one I'm on the fence of. Like Wired's got a lot of, they have a long history of, I think, pretty dumb things in it, but they've also had some really interesting essays and pieces like that. And there is some stuff about like Doge, for example. Right. So, yeah. Doge is building a master database to surveil and track immigrants. Yeah, so that's why I subscribe to them. Also, Rolling Stones, they do have politics. Rolling Stone. So, you could see I went on sort of a subscription spree, just trying to get some more information. And here's what I'd never even heard of: The Root. I go back to The Root. Black news and black views with a whole lot of attitude. And somehow I came across The Root Institute that had some very interesting essays. I thought this one was interesting by Lawrence Ware, which is about the powerful reason why white folks are afraid of a possible American dystopia, but black folks say bring it on. And basically the reason is living in a dystopia is nothing new to us. We were born in one, live in one, and yet we never lost our joy. We created art white people tried to steal. We created food that was filled with soul. Our dystopic experience never beat us down, for we were even able to find love. So I thought that was powerful. And then here's something which is not any sort of print media. This is the Criterion Channel. There's the Criterion collection of movies, and the Criterion Channel would be like the Netflix equivalent or whatever, the streaming version. And so they've got curated, ideas, curated collections, a director for that month or a theme or whatever. And this is also, I already subscribed to this one. I didn't sign up for it again. I don't have much use for things like Netflix, but the Criterion Channel is different. And this has movies from all around the world, real classics. And this is an example of, sort of an institution. It's a company, but, sort of preserving, culture. They're famous for commentary and for, trying to find really interesting, important, movies. So anyway, that's, those are some of the things that I pay attention to. Let's see here. Let's see, did I get... Yeah. Okay. So let's switch browsers. So I was in Firefox. I'm on Mac OS. And let's just talk about Firefox for a second. Now I'm in Safari. I was in Firefox. So if I go to Safari on Mac OS, the latest Mac OS, and I go to privacy, there's this option, hide IP address. And I think it was for trackers only, but now I've got it set to trackers and websites, prevent cross-site tracking, so forth. And I've sort of turned off, new private page, empty page. I use DuckDuckGo as my search engine. Just trying to, be a little less sharing of everything I do on the web, let's say. So with the iCloud private relay, which is what's happening with this hide IP address, basically, you can read about it if you want, if you have a Mac. But there's technology to hide the IP address you're using. So it makes it harder for people to track what you're doing on the web. So it's not... there are also things like VPNs and so forth, but now you have to be using Safari on Mac OS. But that's something that I'm looking into, especially since Firefox has become, which was my browser of choice for a long time. They're changing some of their policies in ways I don't like, that I don't think are good for the users. So think for a lot of my browsing, at least, I'm going to start using Safari and private windows and all that. A few organizations that you could support if you're interested. One is the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, and I've given them money. Now, I don't always agree with everything, every single thing that they support, but that's part of the point of ACLU is, defending people who you don't necessarily agree with, right? That's the whole point of First Amendment rights and all these other rights, is that ACLU will defend people who have some viewpoints that they find despicable, but they'll still defend them. So anyway, ACLU has filed a bunch of the lawsuits that have been in the news for, like, Albrego Garcia, to get him back. My understanding is that was an ACLU lawsuit. So I think they're doing really important work. They knew what was going to happen with this new term, and they prepared, and they've filed a lot of lawsuits, and I think they've been doing pretty well with their lawsuits. So anyway, that's an organization that I support, and they definitely stand up for the Bill of Rights. Electronic Frontier Foundation, so this is for digital privacy, free speech, and innovation, especially if you are into technology, but even if you're not, so I think they're also an organization that's worth looking into and possibly supporting. I would put ACLU before EFF, but I support both. If you are a programmer or someone who's into computers, you may have heard of the Free Software Foundation. I think that what we're seeing now is basically a vindication of everything they've said for a long time. There's this open source software movement, but before that, there was the free software movement. And the idea was free as in speech, not as in beer. And we're seeing why that's important. So we're seeing why it's important to be able to have access to a computer that's running an operating system that's not going to tattle on you, right? So Microsoft Windows, for example, the latest Windows famously shows you ads, that sort of thing. Apple, to some extent, is now into ad business. And I think Apple is still better at the privacy thing than Microsoft in general. However, with the free software, it's an entirely different perspective, where the idea is, the software should serve you. It's not to enrich people. And so anyway, Free Software Foundation, I think that's worth supporting. And also in terms of software, I use a lot of free software from the Free Software Foundation, or licensed under a free software license. But I think it's worth, taking seriously what they've said about privacy and rights and technology, and also supporting them. There is a conference that's held in Brussels every year called FOSDEM, which is the Free and Open Source. It's like a Free and Open Source Development Meeting or something. I forget what it stands for. But it's a bunch of developers and programmers who are into free and open source software, and they get together, 8,000 hackers, and they have these dev rooms. So I've been part of this multiple times, but always at a distance. During COVID, I gave a few talks, but now I'm much more interested in actually going to this. So, yeah. Okay, Harvard Crimson. Yep. Okay, and now let me just tell you about one other piece of software, and this is free software. It's called Kiwix, and Kiwix allows you to do things like download Wikipedia. You can like download the Wikipedia and have a local copy of it. Right. So here we are. I've got Wikipedia on my computer, and I've got the whole thing because I've got an 8 terabyte SSD or flash drive, so I can fit Wikipedia quite comfortably on my computer. You can even download an older copy of Wikipedia before LLMs became, super powerful, because there was this idea that it's nowadays it's very hard to tell if there's a bot using an LLM that's writing a comment in social media or writing a Wikipedia article. And as you may be aware, there's actually a lot of back and forth over Wikipedia articles about, say, Israel and Gaza, right? Anything like that, there's going to be lots of back and forth about editing those and what people consider biased, or people trying to edit the articles to have their point of view. And so anyway, you can download different versions. You can download Wikipedia without images, which is smaller, that kind of thing. So anyway, it's a cool tool, and they have other sorts of data sets you can download as well. I thought that was interesting. And also just reading some books. Now, I'm a lover of physical books. However, right this second, it's easier for me to have things on a physical device. It's just a lot easier to move things around. I've already kind of run out of space for books. But in any case, my recent reading list is a little different than my usual technical reading list. I'm once again have sort of mixed feelings about having these in electronic form. But in any case, I want to read them. So here we have Timothy Snyder on tyranny. He's definitely worth reading, and he's got there are a lot of interviews with him. He's an academic, and he's got different rules. Like here's Timothy Snyder has a bunch of rules: do not obey in advance, defend institutions, and believe in truth, establish a private life, contribute to good causes, listen to dangerous words, be calm when unthinkable arrives, be a patriot, be as courageous as you can. So this book is very famous. It's quite short, actually, and I definitely recommend his talks and interviews. You can find a lot of those on YouTube. Here we have another book, Why Civil Resistance Works. Erica Chenoweth and Maria J. Stephan. Civil Resistance. Okay, so this is this book. Go back. All right. Yeah, this is one advantage of a physical book. I know how to use it. How do we get out of this book? It's a fine book. Don't get me wrong. No. Hmm? Hmm. Oh, okay. Here we go. Okay. I opened one book. Yeah. So the Civil Resistance book is very famous. From Dictatorship to Democracy by Gene Sharp. Nonviolent Action. This is Ronald McCarthy and Gene Sharp. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, very famous book. Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau. Mahatma Gandhi and His Myths by Mark Shepard. Autobiography or The Story of My Experiments with Truth, Mohandas K. Gandhi. Frederick Douglass, Collected Works, Harriet Tubman. With this, Jean Marie Wyson and Rita Daniels. Okay. 20 Years at Hull House, Jane Addams. Democracy and Social Ethics, Jane Addams. Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, Richard Hofstadter. I've read this. Great book. Thought I might want to read it again. An Appeal to the Christian Women of the South. This is like before Civil War. Angelina Emily Grimke. The American Revolution, A Concise History by Robert J. Allison. Oops. Sorry about that. The Boston Massacre by Thomas Fleming. Democracy in America by Tocqueville. Siren's Call by Chris Hayes. The Project by David A. Graham about Project 2025. Robert Caro's books, so far at least, on Lyndon Johnson. A Liberal America by Stephen Hahn. From the War on Poverty to the War on Crime, The Making of Mass Incarceration in America by Elizabeth Hinton. Troubled Memory by Lawrence N. Powell. Boss Tweed by Kenneth D. Ackerman. Lincoln. David Herbert Donald. Here we got a bunch of Lincoln books. His Truth is Marching On, John Lewis and the Power of Hope by John Meacham. The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks by Jean Theoharis, I think it is. So I'm reading this book right now. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. I hope I'm saying that right. The Assault on the State, How the Global Attack on Modern Government Endangers Our Future. Stephen E. Hansen, Jeffrey S. Kopstein. That's been recommended many times in the videos I've watched. The Ratification, The People Debate the Constitution. Pauline Mayer. Blood and Politics, The History of the White Nationalist Movement from the Margins to the Mainstream by Leonard Zeskin. Howard Zinn, The People's History of the United States. The Zen Reader, Howard Zinn. The 60s, Years of Hope, Days of Rage by Todd Gitlin. Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. Surviving Autocracy by Masha Gessen. How to Stand Up to a Dictator, The Fight for a Future by Maria Ressa. I actually have this in book form and audio form, and I wasn't even going to make a video tonight. I was like so depressed after watching on the news. But I was starting to listen to her story. It's like, okay, I'm going to make a video. I'll do like a little bit. So thank you, Maria. Fascism, A Warning by Madeleine Albright. This book's been around for a while. How We Got Here, The 70s, The Decade That Brought You Modern Life for Better or Worse by David Frum. I'm really a child of the 70s, so I'm curious about that. 1968, The Year That Rocked the World. If you're not familiar, there were protests all around the world. 1960, at least big protests and well, I think famously in France, for example. Not to mention everything happened in the U.S. in the 60s. This is an uprising by Mark Engler and Paul Engler. How nonviolent revolt is shaping the 21st century. George Orwell, 1984. Rick Atkinson, The British Are Coming, The War for America, Lexington and Princeton. Of course, we're 250th anniversary. FDR by Gene Edward Smith. Supreme Power, Franklin Roosevelt versus the Supreme Court. The Great Suppression, Voting Rights, Corporate Cash, and the Conservative Assault on Democracy by Zachary Roth. Yeah, Supreme Power is by Jeff Schessel. Let's see, How Democracies Die. Who wrote that? Does that have an author? Here we go. Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt. Okay. The Barn, The Secret History of a Murder in Mississippi by Wright Thompson. Red Plenty by Francis Spufford. The Undertows, Scenes from a Slow Civil War by Jeff Charlotte. Life of Andrew Jackson. Robert V. Remini. And then I got 2 books from this series. Let's see. Got An Afro-Indigenous History of the United States by Kyle T. Mays. And A Protest History of the United States by Gloria J. Brown Marshall. Yeah. So there you go. I got some reading cut out for me. The On Tyranny, the Civil Resistance, The Project, The Assault on the State. These are books that I keep hearing recommended. How Democracies Die. But, just reading about what happened in the 50s and the 60s and Reconstruction and, all the history, and the long fights for different civil rights for people in the United States, all that I think is also very helpful. And also, reading Robert Caro, reading about things like, Roosevelt versus Supreme Court. Well, anyway, these are things that I'm trying to read about. Okay. Those are a few resources. You might find some of that interesting, I hope. And I hope you will stand up for our institutions and what you believe in, and you will not do things that go against what you think is right. Yeah. So, anyway, stay safe. Try to have a little more courage than you might think you have, if you can. And, yeah. Okay, talk to you later. Bye-bye.